Good morning. I'm Malcolm Young, Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the Forum winter season. There's nothing more essential to our health and well-being than breathing. Take air in, let it out, repeat 25,000 times a day. Yet, as a species, have humans lost the ability to breathe correctly? James Nestor is an award-winning author and journalist who has written for Scientific American, Outside, the New York Times, and more. His latest book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, an instant New York Times and London Sunday Times bestseller, turns the conventional wisdom of what we thought we knew about our most basic biological function on its head. Today, we'll be talking about his discoveries, not just in pulmonology labs, as we might expect, but in the muddy digs of ancient burial sites, secret Soviet facilities, New Jersey choir schools, and the smoggy streets of Sao Paulo. And we'll learn how to breathe. James, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I was thinking of you riding your bike around the city as I rode my bike in today, just between the rain, the deluge of rain today. And I wanted to tell you just how much my wife and I appreciated your book very much. I knew it was really working when I rolled over in the middle of the night and there's a little strip of tape on her mouth at midnight. So both of us have enjoyed it very much. But I wonder, the book has sold 2 million copies. It was on the New York Times and London Sunday Telegraph bestseller list for so long. It was translated to 35 different languages. I wonder if you were surprised by the reception of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. You have no idea what's going to happen when you release a book into the world. And that's compounded when you release a book during a global pandemic. So this book came out a few weeks into lockdown, and it wasn't even going to come out. We didn't know how to print it. My entire tour was canceled, and the publisher suggested just not releasing it. But then we thought about it more and thought, we've got a global pandemic that's robbing people of the ability to breathe. Maybe they could use some help breathing better for anxiety and for other issues. So we decided to release it. So it's been a complete shock to me and everybody else.
You must hear from some of your readers. I wonder, what are some of the things you've heard back about, what effect this has had on people's lives?
It really runs the gamut. I've received hundreds and hundreds of letters from either people who have discovered this sleep tape thing, which sounds extremely sketchy, and it should until you really look into it, who have really improved their sleep quality, their snoring, sleep apnea scores, to people who have discovered different ways of breathing to help reduce the symptoms of asthma and panic attacks. So it really spans quite a wide audience as far as who has benefited from these practices.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, just as you were doing the research for this, what were some of the things that most surprised you? 15 years ago, you must have been like all the rest of us and not knowing about the importance of breath.
Yeah, the thing that most surprised me was that humans as a species have become such terrible, terrible breathers. I didn't know this. I thought I was breathing well enough. I'm alive, right? I'm breathing. I thought that breathing was binary. You did it and you were okay, and if you didn't do it, you were in a lot of trouble. Until I met researchers who explained to me that in the past few hundred years, humans have developed mouths that are so small that our teeth no longer fit, so that's why we have crooked teeth. It has nothing to do with teeth. It has to do with a mouth that's growing so small. With that small mouth, you have a smaller airway. That makes it harder to breathe, and that's one of the primary drivers behind so many respiratory dysfunctions, is this smaller airway that we all have.
You also write a lot about just chewing, that there are environmental effects too of being a modern person. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that too.
So the main reason why so many of us have very small mouths and need braces is a lack of chewing. A lot of researchers thought it was due to vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and that ties into it a little bit, but it's mostly not chewing. If you think about the food you ate this morning and the food you've eaten this week and the food you grew up eating, if you're like me, the vast majority of it was soft. And when you don't chew, you don't work out all the muscles, you don't build the proper bones, you don't build the proper airway to be able to breathe properly. So if you look at indigenous cultures that are still eating foods in the wild, they all have perfectly straight teeth, and they have this prognathic face and these large airways, and significantly fewer respiratory problems than we have. So it really goes back to chewing. It's so simple, and yet this is something that we've removed from our lifestyles in the past few hundred years.
Yeah, it's a little bit of like other modern conveniences too, where we really don't have to get any exercise in a way that it would have been unimaginable to people in generations before us, that we'd be driven around in cars.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to relearn how to do all of these things that came intuitively for millions of years. I mean, if your ancestors from 500 years ago would see us today lifting up weights to put them back down in the same place, running on treadmills inside of a house, like they were trying to get away from that stuff, right? So they developed more clean and efficient systems so they didn't have to walk their 8,000 steps a day. But now we're going back and figuring out that our bodies have evolved to need a certain type of food, a certain amount of exercise, a certain kind of sleep, and a certain way of breathing. And so we're just returning to what naturally we were supposed to have been doing.
Yeah. I wonder if we can talk about some of the health effects of breathing poorly. I think many of us are conscious of how it affects all the different functions of our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of you are familiar with bigger respiratory dysfunctions, asthma, COPD, and more. But what a lot of us suffer from is a slight breathing dysfunction, which we're able to breathe good enough to get by, so we're able to live and exercise and sleep, but we're not breathing optimally. So we're always sort of a little bit behind of our health. And this is equivalent to nutrition, right? You can eat a salad once a day, but if you're eating bad food the rest of the time, it's going to catch up to you. And this is what the researchers have told me, especially at night, the vast majority of us are breathing through our mouths, which makes our bodies really struggle to get proper rest. And it makes it harder for us to get oxygen into our bloodstreams, constantly overbreathing and choking on ourselves. So it runs the gamut from exercise. We should not, especially if you're walking and jogging, I can count on one hand how many times I've seen people in San Francisco jogging with their mouths closed. Almost all of them are, This is not good for us. Even though everybody is doing it, it is not an optimal way of breathing.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things for me. I couldn't, that was what I couldn't do. Breathe through my nose and run. That was my failure. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about like its connection to autoimmune disorders and other things that we might not see as being related.
Well, if you're constantly overbreathing, and if you're overbreathing into your chest, which is what the majority of us are doing, you're going to be constantly stressing yourself out. So you can, your blood sugar can go up, your blood pressure can go up, your cortisol can go up. And this doesn't mean that you're just spiking it to some extreme level all the time. It's just elevated. So you're fine, you can exist like that for months or even years, but after a number of years, it's going to catch up with you. And this is what Dr. Margaret Chesney has found, who is at UCSF, who has been studying this dysfunctional breathing, especially in workplace environments, in which the estimate is 80% of us are breathing very dysfunctionally. We suffer from something called email apnea, where you wake up in the morning and you look at all your emails and it stresses you out, and your reflex reaction is to hold your breath. That's a fear response. You hold your breath and then you breathe too much. You hold your breath again, and you do this throughout the day. And that can have a lot of the same downstream effects as sleep apnea. So including what it does to your blood sugar, blood pressure, and more. And if you do this every single day for years and years, it's going to catch up to you at some time. So that can lead into asthma problems, anxiety problems, autoimmune problems, and more.
Yeah, that was very helpful. I thought so much about, you have a little section, you said in the book, you said, breathing is prayer. And you talk about the repetition of holy names in different religious traditions. In the Christian tradition, there's this thing called the Jesus Prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us, which I say throughout the day. And I've always had this strange feeling. There is a way in which I feel more connected to God, more at home in my own skin. And I hadn't realized, but I changed the way I breathe when I say that prayer. I wonder if you can talk about other connections between kind of breathing and religious practice.
So about 20 years ago, some Italian researchers were looking at two different prayers. They were looking at the Buddhist mantra of Om Mani Padme Hum, which I'm sure most of you know. And they were looking at the Catholic prayer cycle of the Rosary. And they noticed that when people recited these prayers, they breathed at this very specific rate, which was about 5 to 6 seconds in, and then 5 to 6 seconds out. And when you're exhaling, you are vocalizing, right? You can't vocalize when you're inhaling. So they said, this is interesting. I wonder what was happening to their bodies when they were reciting these prayers. So they covered them with sensors, and they looked at what happened. And their blood pressure waves and their heart rate and their respiratory rate all locked into something called coherence, where everything is working at peak efficiency. So they called this respiratory rate coherent breathing. And they found that not only with Catholic prayers or with Buddhist prayers, but with Native American prayers, with Indian prayers, ancient Hindu prayers, so many of them locked into the same respiratory rate. So before there were clocks and watches and timers, there was prayer and there was poetry. And when you recite prayers and poetries, it causes you to sit down and breathe at a very specific rate. And I think it's interesting that that specific rate, so many of these prayers and so much poetry locks into this 5 to 6 seconds in, 5 to 6 seconds out.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I experienced. But I didn't realize it until I read the book. And another thing I love about this is, I've always been very conscious of the way when we sing together, we breathe together. So it kind of, you have a whole group of people who are breathing in the same patterns. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just Westminster Choir College, what you learned just about singing and breathing.
Well, we do know that when people sing together, their heart rates lock together too.
I love that. I didn't even realize that.
That's one of the reasons why people can really sync up and lock into harmony. So there's a lot of things that are going on. And one researcher, Carl Stow, was a pretty famous choral conductor, and he taught singers how to breathe better so they could sing better, and it worked really well. What he noticed was that a lot of singers were taking these huge breaths in and vocalizing, but they weren't letting that breath go out. So he found that the key to singing was to exercise the exhale, to allow the diaphragm to ascend up higher. And his choruses started winning all these awards, and he was brought into the Met Opera to retrain opera singers who were already pretty good at singing, how to sing even better. They started winning awards, and then he was brought into the VA hospitals to train the worst breathers in the US at the time, which were thousands and thousands of emphysemics. So he taught them the same patterns that he taught singers, and it did extraordinary amount of benefits for these people.
Yeah, I think I've been most conscious of doing actual breath training when I surf, and there are years when I'm I'm physically strong to take on a higher level of surfing, more challenging conditions. But it would depend on having better breath control than I already have, and so it does constrain me. But I wonder if you can talk about just those people who really have. I mean, they're kind of like the world masters of breath work. The surfers, the freedivers especially. What did you learn in kind of your interactions with freedivers?
Well, that's how I first got into researching breathing. This was not something I ever set out to do. It was through happenstance. I was sent to write about freedivers in the World Freediving Competition, which this was years ago, 9, 10 years ago. This is a competition in which these divers challenge one another to see how deep they can dive on a single breath of air and come back to the surface conscious. So if that sounds like a really bad idea, it's because it is. But I was lucky enough to meet some divers who had a more philosophical approach. And they've trained themselves to breathe so well that they can hold their breath for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes at a time and dive down to depths of 350 feet on a single breath. I mean, this blew me away. And I thought, if you can do that with breathing, what else can you do?
Right.
So it brought up a bunch of questions for me, and it turns out you can do a bunch of things, and that's what got me interested in writing this book.
Oh, I'm so glad that you did. It's funny because I think just in the way that we have Olympic athletes who can, run a 100-meter sprint so quickly. It's important for all of us to have some level of athleticism, even if we're not trying to be a world-class marathoner. It's important for us to have some, and I think that may be the case with breathing too. How about those people who've been trying to take these ideas of such heroic levels of training and breathing and translate them for other people? I mean, I know that Wim Hof is somebody that you write about. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about his story and why is he so attractive and appealing to people? Why do we all know who he is?
So Wim Hof is a Dutch madman, for lack of better words. I know him, and he's a wonderful guy. And he has 26 world records from doing things like jogging barefoot around Everest and diving under ice for minutes at a time. I mean, crazy stuff. He's in his 60s now, and he noticed that discovering these ancient breathing techniques allowed him to push his body to new extremes, to do things that are not supposed to be possible. In one scientific study, he was shot up with the endotoxin version of E. coli, which makes you very, very sick, and used this breathing method and suffered no symptoms. And the scientists said, "You're just a weirdo. No one else can do this." He said, "Well, challenge me." They said, "Okay." So they gave him a group of guys, and they took a group of people as a control, and he had 4 days with this group, to teach them how to breathe in cold exposure. They all went into the lab. Not one of them suffered any symptoms from the E. coli, whereas all of the controls did. So within 4 days, you can help reset your nervous system and your immune system. And I think that's Wim's greatest contribution, and he said this very clearly. The world records are cool, right? It's good for media, but what he works with mostly are people with autoimmune disorders and trains them how to breathe right and gets them into the cold and helps reboot their immune systems. And he's healing people with the power of their breath and their own bodies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extraordinary to read about his accomplishments and to think, what might be possible for all of us. What do you think breathing is going to look like, 10, 15 years from now? I mean, will we recognize that just as it's important to have good nutrition and get adequate exercise, to have high quality sleep, to not be under unrelenting stress forever? Will we start to understand that breathing is part of what it means to be a complete, healthy person?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think that you can eat the best diet, whether you're paleo or keto or vegan or whatever. You can sleep 8 hours a night. You can exercise all the time. But if you are breathing dysfunctionally, you're never, ever going to be healthy. And we've seen this time and time again. So it has to be considered along with those other lifestyle changes. And the majority of us are breathing dysfunctionally. I know that I keep saying that, but I was shocked to learn this. And I keep hearing about it everywhere I go, every time I talk to scientists and researchers. And all you have to really do is look around. Look at how people are breathing. Look at how we're sitting. Look at how we're breathing when we're exercising, when we're sleeping, and more. And you realize we've got a lot of work to do. The good news about breathing, as opposed to changing your diet, it can cost a lot of money. It's a big lifestyle change. Like changing your breathing is free. Anyone can do this once you know how to do it. And you can show very clear benefits within just a few days.
So what are the first steps for like an ordinary person just sitting here this morning, hadn't thought very much about their breathing before? What would be a first step? Like maybe going home today, what would you suggest?
This is the part of the conversation where I'll just bore you all to death, because people expect that after spending years and years researching this, I have some mysterious, mystical advice to tell you the secret key of breathing. But it is the most intuitive, basic stuff that I've found has the biggest most pronounced benefits for people. And the very first one is you have to breathe the majority of your breaths through your nose. If you are a mouth breather, you are never, ever really going to be healthy. So that's the first one, and people are like, oh, that's so boring, I don't want to do, tell me something more interesting. You have to start with this, with a good foundation. Then we can get weird and do all of the crazy different breathing techniques, which can, really have some pronounced effects on your mind and body. But you have to start with a solid foundation, and that's number one.
Yeah, that's right. I wonder, you've seen breathing in so many different cultures, and I wonder if you can talk about just how it looks different in different cultures. We spoke a little bit about just how cultures that have that chewing, that has a physiological effect on their muscles and bone structure. But I wonder if you can talk about just how different cultures look at breathing around the world.
You're never going to find an indigenous population that's breathing through their mouths, ever. And this was, and that's true today for the few that are left. In Native American cultures, it was considered offensive to do that in front of someone. And they trained from infants on up to become nasal breathers. And it's no coincidence, I think, that they have all of this prognathic profile. Their teeth are all straight. Some Native American cultures were 7 feet tall. We don't know that. Tallest humans to have ever been found. And they shared their belief that breathing was a medicine. And this was something that you had to pay close attention to. And you see that duplicated in other indigenous cultures, especially when they're exercising. You don't see other people jogging around in cultures where they're and you can look at any other animal. You don't see a horse sprinting with an open mouth, right? It just doesn't. Or a cheetah. Look at a cheetah running at 60 miles per hour.
Right.
It's breathing through its nose. It's breathing deep into its belly very slowly. So we just have to mimic what is already in nature. And that's what these cultures are much closely more tied to nature than we are. So we can just look to them for guidance on how best to breathe and do so many other things.
We have a yoga practice on Tuesday nights and on Saturdays now. And we've had 500 or 600 people together, and it's a really remarkable thing to see everybody bending their bodies in the same way, breathing in unison with one another. But I do notice that within 3 minutes of practicing yoga, I'm much warmer than I am at any other point of the day. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just you mentioned that Wim Hof talks about breathing is kind of a form of heat regulation.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to understand that better.
Mm-hmm. So I think most of us are breathing too much. And because we think that by breathing more, we're getting more oxygen into our bloodstreams, into our cells. The opposite is happening. I could demonstrate this right now, but I won't. If we all hyperventilate, you're going to feel some lightness in your head. You're going to feel some tingling in your fingers and toes. That's not from an increase of oxygenation to these areas. It's from a decrease of circulation, and that's what happens when you breathe too much. So I think one of the reasons you start to get sweaty doing yoga is you're exercising, you're stretching, but you're also controlling your breath. You are breathing less. And yoga for the past 5,000 years has been a technology of breathing. It's breathing and stretching. And if you don't have your breathing locked into your yoga practice, you are not doing yoga. You're doing pretty unhealthy calisthenics. And a lot of yoga studios that I've been to did not look at breathing at all, or the instructions that they were giving were not accurate. And so the stretching felt good, but you need those two things together, and you're just experiencing some of the benefits of doing proper yoga.
Yeah,
and you're breathing through your nose when you're doing that. Sometimes you can exhale, lion's breath or whatever. That's for a short amount of time. That's a conscious breath, which is completely fine. But the majority of it is you're controlling your breath. The Ujjayi breath is you're resisting your exhale, and that builds heat and builds your carbon dioxide.
That's so interesting. You were actually, involved in your own human potential experiments. I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about what that experience was like when you, for a period of days, blocked your nasal passages, and maybe you can just tell us what that was like.
I'm happy you called it human potential experience, because I called it a human idiocy experience, especially halfway through the experiment. So
you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Super Size Me, the film about the guy who just ate McDonald's, only McDonald's for a period of time.
I got a lot of lit from my friends who thought that this was like a Super Size Me stunt.
Yeah.
That's not how I viewed it, and that's not how Jayakar Nayak down at Stanford viewed it.
Right.
If what we were trying to do, so the background here is I was working with the chief of rhinology research at Stanford, Jayakar Nayak, big nose guy, knows all about breathing, learned a lot from him. He knows all the damage that can be done through mouth breathing. He sees it every single day. So I said, well, why don't you run an experiment? This would be really interesting. Grab a whole bunch of people, have them mouth breathe and then nasal breathe and have your controls. And he said, yeah, sounds great. I'm never, ever going to do that, because he thought ethically it would be, he would have a problem with it, because he knew how much damage mouth breathing could cause. So I said, well, what if I volunteered to do a little experiment? And he said, okay. So the max amount of people allowed in this experiment were 2. So it was me and one other guy from Sweden. And we had to pay for this at Stanford, which was not the cheapest thing I've ever spent money on. And it was 10 days of mouth breathing followed by 10 days of nasal breathing. And we were taking data 3 times a day, blood draws. I mean, it was awful. Oh, wow. So that was the setup, just to see what would happen. And we knew the mouth breathing wasn't going to be pleasant, right? But we didn't view it as a Super Size Me stunt, considering the majority of people are mouth breathing,
right? Exactly,
right? Especially during allergy season.
Yeah.
So we were just lulling ourselves in a position that so many people already knew. The difference was we were measuring what was happening to our bodies and to our sleep and to our exercise and more.
Yeah, and I thought a lot about that experiment, and you're right. I mean, I guess, when you say look around at people's posture, how they're breathing, how they're running, which I do. And some people run by me, you're right, they have their mouth open, they're panting. But the thing that I think is most invisible to us is just, the statistics on how many people are snoring and how much, what breathing is like in people's bedrooms at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And that's so you're right. I mean, that's where people are seeing it, I mean, I think we just take it for granted that you're going to get old and you're going to snore, but maybe that's a bad expectation.
I knew you were going to lead me back into sleep tape here, and here we are, back into sleep tape. So, so a lot of people say, okay, I'm going to close my mouth during the daytime. That's easy. You just close your mouth. But what do you do at night? And this is the question that I had during the Stanford experiment is. During the nasal breathing phase, I said, every time I put my head on a pillow, my mouth opens. Yeah. And I've always gone to sleep for as long as I've known with a big glass of water, and I've woken up when my mouth is dry. Yeah. And I learned from a researcher there that she prescribes a little piece of tape on the mouth to all of her patients, but she said, don't tell anyone this, because all my other colleagues are going to think I'm a quack. So. But this is what she's been doing for years. And so that's what we did, is we used, I know it sounds insane, but this little piece of tape. I cannot tell you how this transformed the quality of my sleep. And I gauge my sleep with various different wearables. And this is the one thing, it's 2 paragraphs in this book, but it's the one thing that I hear about more than anything else. Hundreds of letters of people with their sleep data showing how much it's benefited them. And it's so easy. That's what people think, oh, this can't do much. It's just this little piece of tape. But if you look at how the body works and how it's going to respond to consistent, slow, cleansed, filtered breaths for 8 hours a night when your body is trying to restore itself, you see it starts making sense that this can really have all of those benefits.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because in a way, what you're saying is you understood this at the time that you wrote this, but hearing from people responding to your work kind of confirms you in that idea. I wonder if are there things in here that you've changed your mind on at all, or things that have you look at it in a different way than when you wrote this?
I think that one thing that I guess you could say I've changed my mind on, but I've developed more more thoughts about because of researchers who come up to me. I keep mentioning this, the sleep disordered breathing, especially in kids, is an epidemic, and it's leading to metabolic problems, it's leading to early diabetes, it's leading to growth problems. You're not going to grow as tall as you could if you are snoring and suffering from sleep apnea as a kid. This blew my mind. And then you look at how many people are suffering from this and how many are undiagnosed. So this is extremely low numbers of people are diagnosed with this problem. Once you diagnose it, you can treat it, and that's great. But doctors usually don't ask about it. And so this is the thing I keep hearing from people wherever I go. It doesn't matter if I'm in Europe or if I'm here, wherever, is the sleep disordered breathing. So that's something I'm trying to get the message out a little more. You can diagnose some of this yourself with some apps and wearables now, but especially for kids, you start off with good habits, you build that foundation, they'll be better breathers in the future.
How do like wearables and new technologies, what potential do they have for us in terms of learning how to breathe better?
Oh, I think they're great because you're allowing yourself to collect data on your own and they're pretty cheap. Like a pulse oximeter 30 years ago would have been very expensive. Now they're $15 on Amazon. Tracking your sleep, different stages of sleep, that would have been really hard to do 15 years ago. Now you can get an Oura Ring, and put it on and look at your sleep quality. And you can also look at sleep apnea, all your drops in oxygen with a device that costs $100. So to me, this is empowering for people to start to look into their sleep quality, to look into their breathing quality, and then to figure out ways of improving that.
Yeah. One part you have in the book, you talk about just, training runners through breathing practices. Could you talk a little bit about just how this breathing practices help us to be better athletes?
Yeah, so this is something that is getting really, really popular right now with athletes, and all of the elite trainers that I know, the very first thing they do is they train athletes to breathe better. You would think that these athletes would be great breathers, and they said most of them are disasters. They've just learned how to push through the pain, especially track and field runners, right? And this is why they burn out so quickly. They can push through the pain and win awards, win competitions for a little while. Then after that, they're toast. Yeah. They're in very bad shape. So they're training people to breathe better because this is how we get most of our energy. Through breath. It's not through food, it's not through drink, it's through breathing. And if you are a competitive athlete, you want to be running efficiently. So why would you waste energy? Why would you waste time breathing dysfunctionally, when you could optimize that and run more efficiently? And most of the training they do is to teach these athletes how to breathe less. You might see runners running around with these big Hannibal Lecter masks on right now. You're like, why would someone wear this mask? And that's to train the diaphragm, to train them to tolerate more CO2, because tolerating more CO2 will allow for more blood flow, allows for more oxygen. It's very complicated biochemistry here, but that's what it does. And this stuff's getting really popular because it works really well. That's why people are starting to.
CO2 is something you talk a lot about, carbon dioxide in the book. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, just kind of our misconceptions about what the role of carbon dioxide is in our life, and, what do we need to know more about it?
So in order for oxygen to get to all of those hungry cells in our body, we need to have CO2. And so oxygen goes where there is CO2. There's an exchange. For CO2, we get oxygen. And when you overbreathe, you are blowing off too much CO2. And without having adequate amounts of CO2, as I mentioned earlier, you will suffer from something called vasoconstriction, which makes it harder for blood to get through these blood vessels. And so by having a proper amount of CO2, which is why right now you could maybe breathe into a rate of about 3 seconds in, and if you can, about 8 seconds out. Just very slowly, about 3 seconds in, 8 seconds out, very slowly. And you will probably feel your fingers warming up, the back of your neck warming up, and that is because you are increasing your CO2. You're opening up your blood vessels, and you're allowing for more oxygen to get to your cells more easily. It's so counterintuitive. You would figure that more breath equals more oxygen, but that's not how it works, and we've known this for 120 years. It's called the Bohr effect.
Yeah. So who are some of the researchers who are doing the most exciting work in this field these days?
I think a lot of researchers looking at some of these more extreme breathing methods. I've been talking about all the simple things that everyone can do and benefit from. Breathing through your nose, making sure your mouth is closed at night, breathing slow and steady, breathing less. These are all very easy things. And once you get that foundation, you can start doing a bunch of very fun things with your breathing. This idea of using your breath to purposely stress yourself out. A lot of people may be saying, why do I want to stress myself out? I'm too stressed all the time. That's the problem, is we're all suffering from this low-grade stress that is just consistent. And this is very bad for our health, and this is the main driver behind the majority of modern diseases, is this low-grade stress. So what a lot of people do are they're shocking their bodies throughout the day with extreme amounts of stress for a short amount of controlled time. This diffuses that stress so that for the rest of the day, you can truly relax, because this is how we evolved, to either run away from something or attack something, or to be sitting back and relaxing. Just like your dog barking at the mailman, freaking out for 1 second, and then asleep the next minute. Like, how did they do that? So you can do this through exercise. You can do this through cold exposure, which is getting very big now because it works wonderfully, or you can do this through breathing. So this is why a lot of people are doing these very intense kriyas or pranayamas, or this Wim Hof breathing, or Tummo, which it is purposely stressing your body out. Because you can turn on that stress with your breathing, and then you learn how to turn it off, and that's the key. And there are so many benefits to this. We've known this for a long time because these methods are thousands of years old. But now we have scientific instruments to measure what they're doing to their body, to our bodies, and all the benefits that they have.
You know, so when I surf, it's cold exposure, it's breathing, and it's the exercise all at once. But there is a way in which the rest of the day I just feel like I'm absolutely a new person. I don't even know how to describe it.
So if you're surfing at Ocean Beach, if anyone else is surfing at Ocean Beach, it's certainly an experience that I have.
Yeah.
The moment your breathing is blown on a big day, you need to go in, because it is game over.
Completely.
If you do not control your breathing when you're getting nervous and the waves are getting big, you've lost it, because you've lost your stamina, you've lost your focus, and so much else. So that's what a big wave surfer told me, is whenever he's out with someone and he notices that they're he says, you need to go in immediately. And hopefully they aren't out too far past the brakes, and then they're in real trouble.
The potato patch.
Yeah. So that's something you need to focus on. And that's where I've noticed that nasal breathing, people say, you can't breathe through your nose when you're surfing. You absolutely can. This slow nasal breathing, controlled, rhythmic breathing will help keep you in the zone. It will also help oxygenate your body, which isn't to say you should be breathing through your nose right before you wipe out. That's the time to use your mouth and go and take the biggest breath you can. But it's a tool. Once you know how to breathe through your mouth and nose, you can use mouth breathing as a tool, as a separate gear.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, there's so much going through your nasal passages too. It's almost like I feel like I'm cleaned out in terms of just, all that part.
This is your first line of defense. Okay, everybody, is your nose. Because your nose filters, it helps filter and kill off bacteria and viruses, and it slows down the breath. It does most of the work for you. It's hard to hyperventilate when you're breathing through your nose, right? It forces you to breathe in this rhythm, which is why every other animal is breathing through its nose in these clean, easy rhythms, and why we should be as well.
So what is a dead nose? Something that you talk about in the book.
So this is a bit controversial. I will keep my objective journalist hat on and just give you the viewpoints of the professionals that I've talked to over the years. But a lot of people who have nasal breathing problems are sometimes rushed into surgery, and they don't necessarily need surgery. What they need to do is try to use mild steroid for a week. They need to use a neti pot for a while. You can get a lot of benefits from using other therapies. And this is what I learned from Nyack, who is at the head of this field. And sometimes when people are rushed into surgery and there is an irresponsible ear, nose, and throat doctor, they can cut out too many of the tissues and structures in the nose. You may be thinking, well, if your nose is plugged, more space is better, right? This is a tightly controlled mechanism, and you need just the right amount of air to come in and come out. And if you drill out too much, it will ruin your life. And I've talked to so many people. It's something called empty nose
that's what
syndrome.
Yeah.
And it's where overzealous surgeons go in and drill out way too much space, and they can never catch their breath at night. And it's a terrible thing. So there's absolutely a time and place for surgeries. Surgeries have completely enriched people's lives. I'm a huge fan of them. I think they need to be done carefully, and in my opinion, and in the opinion of NIAC and the other professionals, start slow first, right? It's not going to hurt you to start with a nasal rinse, start with an antibiotic, start with something else that is not so invasive to ruin these perfect structures that we have evolved to have over millions of years.
Yeah. You know, one of the traditions we have here in the forum is we take questions from the audience. So Rebecca Nessa will collect your questions, and I can read a few of them.
Sure.
You mentioned Tummo as being one breathing technique. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So Tummo is an ancient practice. It's supposed to have been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And this is what Buddhist monks in the Himalayas use to heat themselves up during cold winter nights. There have been stories for the past few hundred years where Westerners have gone to the Himalayas, to Nepal, India, and Tibet, and seen these monks sitting in the snow in the winter, breathing and melting a circle around them over the course of a night, which is absolute garbage, right? No one can do that. But enough of these stories kept coming back to the West that finally Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School thought he'd go out as a good researcher. Well, let's go test it, right? Let's go measure it. And found out that these monks can do everything. All of our ancestors were saying they could raise the temperature in their extremities by 17 degrees on demand. He placed them in a cold room that was 52 degrees, put wet sheets over them, and within a half an hour, all their sheets were dry. So it seems impossible until you go out and actually measure it and do the work. So this Tummo practice is used to heat the body up, but it's also used, the Buddhists believe, it allowed themselves to heal the body by using that stress, creating that heat in the body to overcome. That has been less studied, the ability of using Tummo to heal, but they said we could not live in these environments without practicing these focused breathing methods to stay alive. So they did it by necessity, but we can borrow these methods and help enrich our own health.
What about heliotropic breathing? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so this is a holotropic breathing has been around for about 50, 60 years. It was developed as a replacement for LSD treatment. Because when LSD was made illegal in 1968, they wanted to find something that had the same benefits psychiatrists did. And so they developed this practice that's 3 hours long. They put you in a room, they blast music, and you breathe as hard as you can for 3 hours. I've done this. It's crazy. You really go to some places. It's extreme, and that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be this pressure release valve for you to really let everything out. There has been some science behind it, some studies. There need to be more. I've talked to several people, psychiatrists, who have used this with thousands of people, and they said it did what nothing else could do. So this is why it's still practiced. I think you can get a lot of the benefits from other breathing practices personally, but someone may disagree with me, that's fine, that are shorter and more controlled. But you can try it if you want to sit in a room for 3 hours and hyperventilate. We're in the Bay Area.
I know,
These classes are all over the place. We can probably find one at noon if anyone wants to go and do it.
It's probably in like a cathedral or a church or something. Sure. We have so many questions I should have asked you earlier. Hawaiians value the breath. Aloha is mostly known for love, hello, goodbye, but it also is about the breath. Ha is the breath. So that's good. That's a nice comment. I like that. Have you studied how Hawaiians do breathing?
It's the same with the Greeks. It's the same with the Hindus. It's they tie in this. The spirit is tied to breathing in throughout the majority of cultures and religions.
Well,
it's
when
usually
you
the
greet
same
each other in Hawaii,
word.
you put your forehead to forehead. You breathe.
And you breathe together.
Yeah.
You share a breath, and that's celebrated throughout so many different cultures.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm going to put my glasses. I didn't need glasses before the COVID, but now I really do. Why can I sing, but chanting is difficult for me?
Why can I sing?
But chanting is difficult.
I would assume it's how you're breathing when you're singing versus how you're chanting. And there's specific chants, different mantras, different ways of chanting that have been developed that are tied to breathing. I think maybe some chants that don't have breathing instruction, you should find a way that allows you to breathe in rhythm with the chant, and then it shouldn't be difficult. I would pay attention to how much breath you're taking in, and also start training yourself to exhale more. Breathing in is easy. It's that exhaling, getting the diaphragm up, that a lot of people have more trouble with.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you said that, because singing the Mass, singing the Eucharistic prayer, for instance, there are times when I breathe at the wrong point, and that everybody in the room feels it. So it is. It's about like knowing when to breathe, I think. Great question. What was the most significant result you discovered during your research?
Personally, or I guess this is an open question,
Yeah.
right? The most significant results, scientific results that I've found were tied to breathing and asthma. About 10% of the population suffers from asthma. And, a lot of people think, oh, it's from allergens, it's inherited, it's from this, it's from that. From what I've seen and the researchers I've talked to, most of it is caused by dysfunctional breathing. And I was absolutely shocked to see, once you get your breathing in line, once you train yourself to breathe less, once you breathe through your nose, you can see such a reduction in asthma symptoms. And some people that I've talked to, and whom I still know now, don't have any symptoms of asthma at all, from severe to zero over the course of a few months. There's been a lot of studies on this, but still I don't see it talked about that much. The drugs are great, by the way. They work. Oral steroids, bronchodilators, they absolutely work, but they're not a long-term, they're not curing the core problem, and controlling your breathing can help you get control of that core issue. So that's, and I hear from asthmatics all the time of how just controlling simple little things have really helped them get their health back into control.
Yeah. Other than fight or flight situations, is there any other scenario when you would recommend mouth breathing?
Certain states of athletic performance, zone 4, zone 5, if you ever get up that high, if you're into CrossFit and you're really rocking out set after set after set, and you really feel like you need more breath, default into that higher gear of mouth breathing. That's a great time to do it, because you are consciously mouth breathing. You're using this as a tool. If you're a basketball player and you're about ready to dunk on someone, breathe however you want. Who cares? If you're a soccer player, the same thing. But become conscious of how you're breathing and use those different breathing states to do different things. Just like you will be doing when you're surfing. Yeah. You're going to be taking a few huge mouth breaths before you wipe out.
Exactly.
I don't want to take a calm nasal breath before. You want as much breath as quickly as you can. So these are just tools that you can use and acknowledge.
What is next for you? We love the book Breath. Or is there any follow-up documentary, film, or book?
I should never talk about this. Yes, we're working on that, on a documentary, but I've been saying that for a long time. Tinseltown is a very precocious place. I much prefer writing books. It is a different sort of being your own boss is a different experience. But we're putting together a documentary, trying to get this out wider, teach people how to breathe. There's been some disagreements with how to do this. I have a very clear idea of how I'd like to do it. And other producers have their own ideas. But I'm also working on another book and a bunch of other stuff.
Great. So is it breath part 2 or?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
No.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Is
you want to-
people keep asking when the breathe deeper is coming out, and it's not from me. Maybe one of you is going to write this book, but this is my one book on breathing, and I am updating for the paperback. I've learned so much in the last couple of years from so many researchers. A lot of new science has come out as well. So when the paperback comes out, they've allowed me to update a bunch of stuff.
Oh, great. There could be more critical material too in the back too, in terms of just helping it be more useful.
Yeah, and we tried to have, it's harder to explain how to breathe properly in the written word than it is to talk to people and show them this way. The audiobook has all the breathing exercises that you can follow along with that. Not done by me, I'm not a breathwork practitioner, but done by Anders Olsen.
Anders Olsen did it, that's great. I feel like he's my friend now that you wrote about him. Okay. At night, what kind of tape do you recommend using to keep your mouth shut? And how about back versus side sleeping? That's a great specific question.
So, sleep tape. I knew we'd be talking about it here again. I have been sent about 12 different kinds of sleep tape by different manufacturers. You can use whatever tape you want. Don't use duct tape. Some people have tried that. You don't want to do that. So what I have found, this is just my opinion, which doesn't mean much, but after trying 30 different kinds of tape, what I have found is surgical tape, micropore surgical tape, which is meant to be placed on skin and taken off. So it has this very light adhesive to it. And I take a little piece of tape about the size of a postage stamp, and I take some of the adhesive off and I put it on my lips, and that's the technology. That works for me. Some people like a fat strip here. But the key is you should be able to, without any effort, go, this is not a hostage situation, this isn't Pulp Fiction. It's a reminder to keep your mouth shut. And I have found that little piece of tape works well for me. You can use whatever brand you want. Now there's a lot of different kinds of sleep tape marketed on Amazon. Use that stuff if you want. Whatever.
I like it. How can I do more nasal bleeding? And when I sleep at night, I am diagnosed with sleep apnea. P.S. I have a sleep apnea machine, which I don't use as it is hard to use.
Yeah, I think about 50% of people who are prescribed a CPAP no longer use it within about 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. They work great. They're absolute lifesavers. But again, are they addressing the core issue? I don't think so. And the last thing I'm gonna do is say use sleep tape instead of your CPAP. Absolutely not. Which is why you need to use sleep tape in a very slow, controlled way. Don't all go home and try to wear this if you've never done this. Wear it in the day for an hour at a time, answering emails, then wear it for 2 hours, then wear it taking a nap, laying down, and take a long time to acclimate. It's not for everybody. But gauge for yourself, use common sense, and it could help you. So as far as CPAP, find where the core issue is. Is it in your airway? Is it your tongue is falling back too much? Side sleeping definitely helps with snoring and sleep apnea. What they used to do back in the day is they would have people tape a ping pong ball or a sock to a t-shirt and wear that so you are no longer sleeping on your back. It forces you to sleep on your side, and that can really help. There are many wearables that you can use to look at your improvements in your oxygen dips, so you can gauge what's working for you at what time.
Do you recommend a particular breathing app?
They're all doing the same general thing. They work great. They say breathe in for 4, breathe out for 6. I think you can memorize a lot of these hacks yourself and get the benefits from that.
Researchers at Stanford have studied the effect of light on the mind. Have breath doctors incorporated any conclusions from that work into their practice?
Light, as far as blue light exposure at night, this happens to be something I'm starting to research into this area right now. So absolutely, I think we have no idea what living underneath LED lights has done to our sleep patterns, our health. Not being around near infrared light anymore has really damaged us in a lot of ways. So luckily, the word is getting out about blue light exposure right now, and you can see for yourself how it affects your sleep quality by tracking your sleep quality.
Yeah. Listening to facts about singing and breathing together, I recall learning that when we listen deeply, our brain patterns match. What about cognition being impacted by breath?
Without a doubt, and they've seen this across many different studies. So not only will your heart rates start to sync up, because when you control your breathing, you control your heart rate as well. So when everyone's breathing at the same pace, this is what's so magical about being in a big room where everyone's breathing at the same pace. You feel this connection. That's more than just the breath. I think that there's something going on a deeper level. It's a physiological level, and then another level on top of that.
We're so thankful for your research at proper breathing for our physical well-being. What is the work being done on mental illness and breath?
There's a lot of work being done on looking at anxiety and PTSD and depression and breathing. I have not talked to a psychologist or a psychiatrist who has dealt with someone with anxiety who did not have severe breathing dysfunction. All of them breathe too much, okay? And they cannot hold their breath for more than a few seconds. And this is the same with asthmatics. If you ask them to inhale and hold their breath, they'll last about 5 seconds. You want to get that to around 40 seconds. And once you get it to around 40 seconds, you start to see some tremendous changes occurring.
With all that you learned, do you have a regular breath work or breathing practice?
Yeah, I sit home every day in a robe with beads, and I breathe all day long. So no,
good.
I do not. People think that's how I spend my days. No, I'm as stressed out as all of you are.
Trying to meet deadlines.
Trying to meet deadlines. I've adopted many of these things into my. You can't not, after seeing how people have been transformed. The simple things are the best, but I do longer breathing practices as well, and find an incredible amount of benefit from doing those.
I've read your book and loved it. Thank you. Questions. Breathing cycle should include 3 parts. 1, breathe in, exhale. 2, exhale. 3, pause. How important is the pause?
It depends what you're doing and what you want to do. You shouldn't be pausing throughout the day. So ancient Hindus wanted breathing to be a circle. Imperceptible between the inhale and exhale. It should all be a circle. What we're finding now is we need to breathe less, and a way to condition ourselves to breathe less and accumulate more CO2 is to have that pause. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of box breathing. So you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. There's a conscious pause in there, and that allows you to start controlling your breath. It allows you to reduce your blood pressure, allows you to reduce your heart rate. So those pauses, it depends what you're trying to accomplish and when.
Great. The nose. What has your research told you about the utility of neti pots?
Neti pots are great. That's the first thing I do when I get off a flight, especially a long flight, is I go to a hotel and I use a neti pot. There is some pretty clear science showing that they're beneficial. It's less clear when it comes to looking at, do they really allow you to avoid getting sick more often, because doing those studies, I think you would need thousands and thousands of people, and there's zero funding for neti pot studies right now. Trust me on that.
The neti pot industry is not funding too many.
But Jai, I will again refer to the chief of rhinology research at Stanford. He's a huge fan of neti pots, and hearing him talk about them, I said, okay, I'm going to take this more seriously now.
That's good. Breathwork is very popular, a very popular wellness modality these days. Can you speak of the benefits of breathwork as well as the misinformation about it, as many techniques involve breathing in and out of the mouth in a sequence pattern? Thanks.
I think the misinformation is when people try to promote one specific way of breath work over another one. I think that's garbage, because most of them are all doing the same thing. They're coming to the same point through slightly different means. They will have you breathe too much, then they will have you hold your breath, and then they'll have you breathe too much and hold your breath. And those same patterns have repeated in kriyas and pranayamas and more. So whenever someone starts claiming this is the one way of breathing and this is going to fix all your problems, go the other way. There are many ways of using breathing that are beneficial in the same ways.
And by the way, if someone tells you the same thing about religion, this is the only religion, and if you go, it's the same thing.
I'm going to let you speak to that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you have any, for your fourth book after this on the religion, that I'll be part of that. You can interview me for then. Okay. Well, you can buy James's book. It's available in the back. I know you'll learn much more from it than we had time to talk about today. On March 12th, please join me for a conversation with photographer David LaChapelle. We are the grateful recipients of a gift of his work, Our Lady of the Flowers, which will be an exhibit starting on March 11th. We'll also be talking about his career, which ranged from working with Andy Warhol to directing videos for Elton John. You're very welcome to join us at the 11 o'clock Choral Eucharist upstairs in the cathedral. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including online at gracecathedral.org. And James, you have made such a big difference in so many people's lives through your careful work. And we tease you about going through those studies and choosing to be the human guinea pig, but we appreciate what you've taught us, and we wish you well as you go into your next endeavors. I hope that the next phase of your career is as productive and as creative as this one was.
Thank you very much. And thanks, everybody, for showing up here Sunday morning.